And I just love the line in the latest report that's come out from Church Army, that nothing else as a whole has this level of missional impact and the adding of ecclesial communities. When I first came into the team 2.5 years ago, I remember one of the strap lines then was initiative to movement. But the big challenge then was, how do we get there and what does that look like? Because you create an initiative and you run it, but you don't try and run a movement. And so how on earth do we genuinely begin to release this in a way that embeds it into the historic denominations without domesticating it? And so that's really what we've been working on. And as time's gone on, I'd say that a lot of what we're doing at the centre has been very much vision-led, but a lot of finance-driven as well. So we've now got a massively trimmed organisation, which I think has very much been led by God. But the networks and the partnerships and the team are just multiplying all the time. So all of that's been really encouraging. And we're heading, whereas like 12 years ago when the team first started, there were 3 very clear components in that there were a couple of missioners who represented the denominations, there were a couple on the training side and a couple on the comms side. And that's gone on growing into clusters. But where we're aiming for in a couple of years as we release this is we'll end up with 3 separate but codependent, what we're calling spheres. So there'll be FE partners, which will be about the embedding agenda very much, and they'll be laser focused on that and in a partnership way. And then FE resources, which is basically taking all the movers and shakers of this from every area together, locking them in a room and saying, look, reimagine this, and also bring on board now the international question. Because I know we got the Germans and the Swedes here today, and we had a great day with the Germans yesterday, and just a sense that in some areas they're ahead of where we are. And so we're asking the question now, what does an international learning community look like? And we're creating the first of those next year to begin to explore how we can just unlock the riches that are there really globally. What I want to talk about very quickly, and then for us to talk with Rick and get to know Rick a bit more, is that it feels like there are 4 big words, 4 buzzwords that just seem to be coming up over and over again. Whichever room you go in, whatever meeting, conference, or whatever, these seem to sum up where we are with the movement and where we're going. And those words are, let's see if we go back here. So reimagining, partnering, embedding, and reproducing. First of all, the reimagining word, innovation, imagination, and just the sense, increasingly, I think, as people have become more and more honest about where we are, that the sheer scale of innovation and imagination that we need to take the church where it needs to be is still off the scale, that we've just started. But there's a new honesty, I think, in terms of grappling with that and a new desire to really engage with it. And that's why, and these 4 are interlocked in a way, but that's why partnership has become increasingly important, because the sense is that actually no group, no denomination, no network can do this on their own, that we actually need that imagination come from every conceivable end, including the international as well, that we genuinely are better together in every way. And I think what we've been seeing, especially over the last year or two, is an accelerating, changing culture of partnership. The joke used to be very often that dioceses just do not talk together and engage together and network together. And when Bob, Mary Hopkins and myself started working on the idea of an interdiocesan learning community for senior teams, the first feeling was, don't be silly, dioceses don't work in those kind of ways. And now we've got to a point where the church commissioners are actually funding the appointment of people to begin to roll this out across the diocese in thinking what it means to be a mission-shaped diocese. The partnership hubs that we've started, both ecumenical but very much in terms of the embedding agenda and what we're doing here, have been multiplying. And it's been great. Particularly, we started with the sort of pioneer missioners coming together, but then we started to look at the other roles. And I remember probably about 18 months ago thinking, wouldn't it be great if we could get half a dozen bishops together who would be really serious advocates for fresh expressions. And now we've got nearly 30 of them meeting, and 10 of them were meeting earlier today. And they really are truly advocates and hungry for wanting to embed this. We've got the same with the archdeacons, and those hubs themselves are multiplying all the time. And then where there are conferences and gatherings, that partnership question, I think, is much more there naturally. So a couple of weeks ago, we had the first new monastic communities conference in London. And for the first time, that really brought together, right across the traditions, these communities. And again, at the heart of that agenda was, how can we live and work together? What does it mean? What could it mean to be a network, a learning community in this whole area? So all of that's been really encouraging. The next word is the embedding word, and the sense that we've moved way beyond what at the beginning had the danger of an either-or feeling. You know, either you can do it the inherited way, or now there's this new thing. And very much now a sense of this is both and all the evidence is really showing us that. The latest research again, that over 3/4 of fresh expressions remain within and part of the parish that started them. There have been some fantastic large diocesan conferences recently in Sheffield and Ely, really laser focused on the embedding, the mixed economy agenda, deep and wide in Sheffield and blended in Ely. So again, the embedding agenda is really taking hold. And you can sense that really today, can't you, from the discussions that are happening here. And then that last question of reproducing, and the sense that whatever we do here, that it's got to be about multiplication and reproducing, and multiplication at every level. So I think one of the things that I talk about with my role, I look back at the role that Graham used to have, and my job, I've discovered pretty quickly, was to give away my job. So it's interesting that today now we've got Dave Mail, he's the National Advisor for Pioneer Development. I think that was probably about 10% of my role, and now he's got this huge full-time role there. Rick as Fresh Expressions Bishop's Advocate, and Mike here as the new chair of the Pioneer Panel. And when you think, only 3 years ago that was all under one person, but the roles are multiplying at every level, and another good sign that this really is being embedded. So, Rick, come and talk to us. And I thought it would be a really good idea in terms of us getting to know Rick and the role that he's doing and what his heart is in all of this, is really just to take those 4 words and ask you a few questions around them and just let you talk about them. But first of all, Rick is talked about in terms of being a bishop in 3 ways. So I thought we might clear that up to start with. First of all, you're Bishop of Islington. Do you want to explain that one?
Yeah, so thank you very much for this opportunity to talk. I have been a bishop for just over a year now, and the Bishop of London, he revived I've forgotten the word now, but it's basically a see that stopped functioning about 100 years ago and went into kind of abeyance, that's the word. And the Bishop of London resurrected it. It's the See of Islington. And Islington is now covered by the Bishop of Stepney, so that area is already looked after. And he enabled this new role to exist, to be able to focus not on churches that already exist, but on churches that don't exist yet. So in other words, churches that are going to be started or planted or fresh expressions or whatever, just that, it's the church that don't. And as soon as they start existing, and as soon as they become a church, then we hand that off to a local area bishop. So the Bishop of Islington is a new role. It's like a mission bishop in London. And the way he configured it was it's about 80% of my time is focused in London diocese, and then 20% of my time is available to other bishops that might want to use this role. And so that's the kind of configuration of
and that
how it
kind
works.
of clears up the second one, because there has been a kind of nickname that's evolved of the Bishop of Church Planting, hasn't there? But that's the kind of 20% bit, but it's quite focused.
So there's no one bishop who's focused purely on church planting. All the bishops in England have church planting as part of their agenda, because they want to see churches new churches started or revitalized and so on. But my background is that I've been involved in church planting for much of my time as an ordained minister. And so it's kind of my passion to see new churches started to reach beyond the existing walls of the church. And so I guess because I've done church planting and I'm encouraging church planting in London and encouraging it nationally, there's a nickname. It's not strictly true, but I'm referred to often as, he's the bishop of church planting. So it's not really true, but that's what people say.
Okay, and now you're the bishop's advocate for Fresh Expressions. So how does that feel, and how does it all?
Yeah, well, I'm really, really excited about it, because my own background experience is that I've been a parish priest for about 11 years in Shadwell in East London, and we were part of a church plant team that came from Holy Trinity Brompton in 2005. There was a church in Shadwell that just had 12 people left in it. They were going to close it. The Bishop of London said, I don't like closing churches, let's try a church plant. And I brought a team with us. I was appointed as the priest in charge of this parish church. We saw that church begin to start growing. One of the things that I discovered fairly quickly was that actually we were the only church in our parish. So there was no other denominations, no other even small groups from other churches, which is quite unusual in London and quite unusual anywhere in a way. And so I knew that we weren't able to reach everyone in our parish. We tried and we just weren't able to. There were some people who would never connect with the Anglican church, and actually some would never connect with a traditional church. So it was like we started realizing we needed partners and we needed to do things differently to the way the institution was doing it. So we needed fresh expressions. And we experimented with various things, trying things in a local pub, trying things in on estates and different parts of the community. So I was kind of dabbling in fresh expressions already. But then as I began to take on a diocesan role in terms of encouraging church plants all over the place, and we set this goal of saying, let's have 100 new worshipping communities in London Diocese. And the way we were going to do that was not just through traditional church planting, which is what I'd done, revitalizing a parish church, but having lots of different ways of doing church. And of course, Fresh Expressions, the thinking behind that, the experience behind that, began to be an obvious way of seeing that kind of thing happen in practice. Now, I was coming very much from a traditional church planting lens, and then I began to engage with George Lings, who said, well, actually, what you've done in traditional church planting, revitalizing, we would just call that as part of what we do with Fresh Expressions. So it's like, if you're from my end, Fresh Expressions is another part of the spectrum of church planting, and from his end, church planting is part of the spectrum of Fresh Expressions. So we are kind of on the same spectrum. And so as Bishop's advisor for Fresh Expressions, basically I feel I'm stepping into a space that is encouraging all these new things to reach people who are not part of the existing church. And there is such a spectrum that it's even difficult to categorize some of these things, but we know that God is at the heart of them doing new things, and we want to fan those things into flame. So
great.
That's part of it.
Let's just whip through these 4 words.
Yeah.
So imagination and the need for innovation. Just tell us what's been brewing in your imagination.
Well, as soon as if you've been a parish priest and you start thinking about what you're actually trying to do. So in our area, Anglicans are about 1.7, 1.8% of the population. There are about 8% of people who go to church. So Fresh Expressions often starts in the 92%. 92% of people who don't go to church. That's where it's kind of working. And if the existing church doubles in size, so 8% to 16%, we're still not even touching 84% of the population. We've got to go into that new space, and it's got to be in new ways, reaching new people in new places in new ways. We've got to imagine completely different ways of doing church. So there's a whole spectrum of possibilities, and we've got to be encouraging everything, not just 1 or 2 models, but everything that's going on. So that reimagining piece is, I think I heard Ruth saying in one of the, Beth saying in one of the seminars early on, there'd been some difficulties in parts of the diocese and parts of the Church of England saying, no, we don't like all this newfangled stuff, that there isn't a place for that today. Well, actually, the opposite is true. And more voices centrally and in the institution are saying, we've got to think outside the box, we've got to give that space. One quick thing on this, I used to work in marketing in Unilever, and we set aside significant budget for research and development. we needed space where we could try new things in new ways. If you look at a pharmaceutical company, it spends about 80% of its budget on research. They know that if they explore, say, 1,000 products and 10 of them work, that will easily pay for that research. And that you can't find those 10 that work unless you do the 1,000 that you're trying. And that's the same with us. We've got to be imagining new ways of doing things, reaching new people in different ways. And we need to put money aside to do that, and space and leadership to be able to do that.
Great, okay. Partnering. Now, of course, you have all kinds of connections. You cross all spans of church planting. You see how we all tie ourselves in knots over language and vocabulary and all of that, and put ourselves and others in boxes. What would you like to say about partnership and joining the threads, learning to be friends across all the various strands?
I'm passionate about this because I know that we cannot do it alone. So the Church of England is part of the one holy Catholic and Apostolic Church. That's what we are. We say that in any ordination service. That's part of the liturgy. We're part of the wider body of Christ. And so you realize, actually, when you're trying to do any kind of mission, we know this, that we need partners to be able to do this. We cannot do it alone. God never intended that. So partnership is the order of the day. And I think going are some of the walls that we put up around us. 10, 20 years ago, you cannot imagine the kind of what's going on today as being part of a conversation in the Church of England, let alone particular dioceses. We are forming partnerships all over the place because we need to. We are part of the body of Christ. Every part of the body of Christ is needed. So that means different denominations. It means different wings of the church. It means even just different emphases within churches. We need to have partnerships all over the place. And so part of my role as an advocate for this is to bless partnership and to encourage it, to stir it up and say, to block off yourself on your own is no longer, it's not part of being a Christian. It's not part of being in the Church of England. It's not part of just being in the body of Christ. We have to recognize that we are just one part of the body. And so we need to be encouraging that more and more. There's much to learn, isn't there, from people who do it differently. And actually, to go with the kind of learning hat on all the time, actually we're going to learn so much more if we do that.
Great, okay. Embedding in the Church of England. Let's just take one little part of that, the bishops.
Yeah.
What's this beginning to look like with and among the bishops?
So I'm one of the most junior bishops in the Church of England, and I haven't a clue about how to be a bishop because I've only done it for a short amount of time. But I'm passionate about seeing every bishop and every diocese have fresh expressions as part of their mainstream agenda. So the words mixed economy should be completely normal within every diocese. It's not there yet. And where you are, you've got some people who are pushing ahead. This diocese is an example of a diocese that's pushing ahead because there have been bishops who said, we need this to be at the center of the agenda. But there are others who are just interested in that, and they're excited by that, but they need to have that question, what do we do next? And there are others who are kind of on the fence saying, we still need to be persuaded, and there are some who just don't get it at all. So each group is able to help the next one along to take steps forwards. And so as embedding is about helping those who are at the front to just pass on a baton to those who are one step behind, to say, look, this is what you do. And those who are one step before say, yes, I understand the questions you've got. This is how we've moved forwards. So embedding is about helping that conversation get more and more as part of the main agenda of bishops' kind of practice and their strategies and so on in dioceses. But it's also to make sure that the Fresh Expressions movement is not just something on the outside, being almost like a prophetic voice to the inside saying, here's a new way of doing things, but actually it's fully part of the very center of what's going on. And of course, what we don't want is for that to be something which we just get stuck in because we're stuck in the institution as a movement of Fresh Expressions. No, it's actually saying there's a prophetic voice always saying, keep looking outwards, keep breaking new ground, keep on finding new ways of reaching the lost and connecting with people who are far outside the church so that they can discover and hear the good news of Jesus in different ways. So that embedding is making that part of the regular conversation right on the inside.
Okay, thank you. I think we're probably running out of time. You've talked about reproducing and all of those.
Well, let me just say one thing about reproducing. I love all this stuff. If multiplication is part of the biblical agenda from Genesis chapter 1, God said, go and multiply to men and women, the first men and women in the scriptures. So it's very much part of the kingdom parables of multiplication are right in there. So we need to step into not just doing something new, but actually doing something new that will produce something new. So I've done loads of discipling in my life, as I was brought up on that, and I discipled lots of individuals, but one key question I missed out every time until about 5 years ago was, who are you discipling? And as soon as you ask that question, you're setting up multiplication, because you're saying, I'm asking a question of the person I'm discipling, who are you discipling, so that they will disciple someone else. And they'll ask the same question to them, which will then lead to a multiplication of people being discipled. That is a game changer, because it makes something replicate. We can do the same with churches, the same with fresh expressions. It just needs to be part of the agenda. And now more and more, I would say every conversation I have in terms of starting something new, one of the questions I say is, how are you going to make this multiply? Who are you training up? Who's your apprentice that you can give this away to so that they can take this up in a new way, in a new place with new people? And then they will have an apprentice themselves who will then train other people and so on. So getting that multiplication as part of what we're doing is absolutely essential in terms of seeing this roll out.
Fantastic. Okay, thanks. And in terms of us being a movement as well, I think this is about literally reproducing absolutely everything. So it's not just fresh expressions themselves, reproducing networks, strategic hubs, support communities, reproducing best practice wherever we see it, reproducing good models of training, pioneer development, reproducing coaching, reproducing research, reproducing strategic leaders at every level, and then doing all of those things in innovative ways with the intention to embed, and always where possible in partnership. And I think hopefully that gives us a snapshot of where we might be going. I'm going to try, just as people are coming in now, to show that video, and we'll finish with this. One more go.
I can't see. Is it going to? I think the guy. Oh, there we go.
Quickly gaining influence across the Western world and is spreading to the global South. It's called Fresh Expressions of Church. Now, the funny thing about the name is that in one sense the movement is completely fresh, but in another, it's actually not fresh at all. You may have heard of missional communities, church plants, organic church, hub church, or even new monastic communities, all of which are names to describe a non-traditional church. You know, the ones with a building and a steeple and a door for all the people. Well, these fresh expressions are very different. They emerge among homeless people, the residents of an apartment building, users of a laundry, people learning English, even people on the beach, people in cafes and pubs and in the workplace, wherever people hang out and do life. The church that we read about in Acts was a fresh expression. In fact, it was the freshest expression that the world has ever seen. Through Jesus, God was doing something entirely new. It was so different and inviting that people on the outside so loved what they saw that every day the number in the Christian community grew as God added to those who were being saved. These new Christian communities are igniting explosions of love all over the world. They prayerfully find ways to serve the people around them. They build community with those involved and share Jesus with anyone who'll listen to them. And they encourage church to take shape around individuals coming to faith. They're not stepping stones to an existing church because fewer and fewer people are seeking out the traditional churches. They are church for people right where they are, in the middle of everyday life. The ideas behind Fresh Expressions have the power to recalibrate your experience of church. They will open up radically different ways for you to meet Jesus. Might it be that you and the believers you know might need a bit of shaking up? If that's you, then it might be time to get back to what Jesus started. Time to reimagine your role in the great story of God and His kingdom. Time to discover with fresh eyes what the Spirit may be calling you into. Time to journey into the Father's intentions for you.
So the whole point of this video is that halfway through you use your own imagination to get the pictures. Completely fresh. Okay. Actually, another way in which we did reimagine it, when we did the first version, it had an American accent on, and because we had some brilliant people on our team of young adults who were leading that, but we thought that's not quite going to do it for us in the Church of England especially. So we then reimagined the idea, and this is going to be available so that people can dub their own version and their own accents or their own language into the video. Okay? So if you want a Geordie version or a Welsh version or a Scottish version or whatever, you'll be able to do that as well. Okay, thank you. You can download this for yourselves and see the whole thing.
Thank you very much. And thank Rick and Phil.